A bank towed a man's truck from his own driveway and handed him the legal opening he had been quietly building toward for 35 years. What they thought was a routine repo turned out to be the most expensive mistake Meridian National ever made. Pratt had been a licensed attorney for 3 weeks when he made the call that would cost his firm a weekend. He found the discrepancy on a Tuesday, a routine title search on a 12-acre industrial parcel in Licking County, Ohio, a warehouse expansion. The kind of file that closes in 8 days and gets initialed without ceremony. Pratt had been assigned to it because it was supposed to be simple. He called his senior partner at 6:47 in the morning. His senior partner called the bank. The bank had already sent the tow truck. At 6:12 that same morning, a contractor hired by Meridian National Bank had hooked a 2004 Ford F-250 from the gravel driveway at 4418 Decker Road, Hebron, Ohio, impound lot, 17 miles east. The paperwork cited unauthorized obstruction of a managed access corridor along the western boundary of Lot 7. The truck belonged to Marvin Holt. The driveway belonged to Marvin Holt. The 9.4 acres of Licking County ground beneath that driveway had belonged to Marvin Holt since 1989. Marvin found out the way a man finds out about things he expected. He walked outside with his coffee, saw the empty gravel, stood there a moment, went back in. He did not call the police. He did not call a lawyer. He went to the kitchen closet, moved 2 boxes of old seed catalogs, and pulled out a manila envelope with a rubber band so old it had fused to the paper. 1 document inside, single fold. He smoothed the crease with his thumb, set it on the kitchen table next to his coffee cup, and called his daughter. 35 years earlier, Marvin Holt had been 26 years old and had never bought land before. He drove to the Licking County parcel auction alone. No lawyer, no partner. A bank envelope in his jacket with $8,000 inside and a folded piece of paper in his breast pocket. The auction was held in the parking lot of the old Grange Hall on Route 40. Folding tables. A coffee pot nobody had refilled since 8. A county auctioneer named Dwight with a paper cup of Mountain Dew and a voice like gravel in a tin can. 4 locals stood along the fence, watching without particular interest. The parcel on the block was 19.4 acres on Decker Road, flat, underworked. Landlocked on 3 sides with no recorded road access. That last part was the whole reason the price was low. A man named Caulfield stood across the table. Gerald Caulfield. 3rd-generation Licking County developer, the kind of man who arrived at county auctions with a lawyer beside him and a thermos of actual good coffee. He wore a pressed field jacket. He had already done the math on this parcel 3 different ways, and all 3 answers told him the same thing. Nobody with sense would bid on landlocked ground. He bid $7,200 and relaxed. Marvin bid $7,800 and stood still. Gerald looked over. Dwight called it. Gerald turned to his lawyer and laughed, not quietly. The sound carried across the folding table and past the 4 men along the fence. He said, 20 acres with no road access. Man bought himself a landlocked island. The lawyer smiled. One of the fencemen shook his head. Marvin signed the paperwork. His handwriting was small and steady. He folded the receipt and put it in his breast pocket next to the other paper. He did not look up. Dwight handed him his copy. Marvin nodded once, walked to his truck, and drove home. The radio was off. He did not stop for gas. He drove the 31 miles back to Decker Road in the same quiet he had arrived in. Doris was in the kitchen when he got home, his wife of 4 years. She was pouring coffee into 2 cups before he reached the door, which was the thing about Doris. She always knew when to have the second cup ready. She set one in front of him. She said, "How'd it go?" He said, "Got it." She looked at him a moment. She said, "The landlocked one." He said, "Yep." She sat down across from him at the kitchen table and waited. Doris was not a woman who pressed. She had learned early that Marvin said the rest of a thing when the rest of a thing was ready to be said. He reached into his breast pocket and set 2 folded papers on the table. One was the receipt from the auction. The other was something older, creased in 4 places. The paper had the particular pale yellow of a document that had been photocopied from microfilm. He did not unfold the second one. He just rested his hand on it. Doris looked at it, then at him. She said, "You've been working on this a while." He said, "About a year." She picked up her coffee. Did not ask more. That was the thing about Doris. She never needed the whole picture to trust the direction. Outside, the land sat quiet. 19.4 acres, flat, scrub trees along the western edge, a rusted fence line along the south. No road visible from any angle. Gerald Caulfield was already back at his office by noon, his lawyer filing the Grange Hall visit under routine auctions. Nothing to note. Nobody called Marvin. Nobody drove out to see what he'd bought. The land was landlocked. That was the end of the story, as far as anyone else was concerned. Marvin sat at the kitchen table for a long time after Doris went to bed. He picked up the older paper, held it without unfolding it. He knew something. Nobody else in Licking County knew it yet. He put the paper back in the envelope, went to bed at 9:15. He slept fine. You won't believe what Marvin found buried in a public library that turned this whole thing upside down. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button now, because what comes next changes the entire game. February 1987, Licking County Public Library, 2nd floor. The room with the microfiche readers, and one window that faced the parking lot. Marvin Holt had been coming here every third Saturday for 11 months. He had a notebook, black and white marbled cover, 49 cents at the hardware store on Route 16, and a sharpened pencil. He had developed a system, County Road Commission minutes, tax plat maps, deed abstracts from 1901 forward, surveyor records sorted by township. He did not rush. He read everything the way a man reads a utility bill, slowly, looking for the number that doesn't match. He had started because of one question. The Decker parcel had no recorded road access. That was a fact. Everyone at the auction knew it. Gerald Caulfield had banked on it. But Marvin had grown up in Licking County. He had driven county roads since he was 16. And he knew something about landlocked parcels that most people don't. Land doesn't become landlocked by accident. It becomes landlocked because something planned to reach it never finished the trip. He started with the Road Commission minutes. March of 1973, page 11 of the typed meeting notes, a motion was made and seconded to extend Fenwick Road westward along the boundary of what the minutes called the Decker agricultural parcel. The vote was 4-1. The county engineer was directed to survey the route. Marvin wrote it down. He came back 2 Saturdays later and found the survey report. Fall of 1973, the route had been staked and measured. A 40-foot public access corridor running the full length of the western boundary, recorded as a planned right-of-way. He came back again and found the recording, February 14, 1974, Valentine's Day. The easement had been formally filed with the Licking County Recorder's Office. It was a legal instrument, a public access corridor. On record, he sat with that for a moment. Then he went looking for what killed it. It wasn't hard to find. A 1975 County Commissioner report noted that federal transportation funding for the Fenwick Road extension had been withdrawn. The project was shelved pending future budget availability. Future budget availability never came. But the easement recording, the one from February 14, 1974, had never been vacated. Nobody had filed the paperwork to kill it. It sat in the deed books alive and untouched, the way a promissory note sits in a drawer when both parties forget it exists, but the law does not. Marvin wrote the recording number in his notebook. He wrote the date, he underlined it twice. Then he went to the recorder's office on a Thursday afternoon. A woman named Bev had worked the front counter since 1969. When Marvin set the microfilm reference number on her desk, she found the original document in 11 minutes without opening a computer. She stamped a photocopy. He paid 35 cents. He folded it in quarters and put it in the breast pocket of his canvas work jacket. That was the paper he had carried since 1987. He spread everything across the kitchen table that Saturday evening. The kettle was on. Doris moved around the kitchen without asking questions. She set a cup near his elbow and looked at the hand-drawn map he had sketched from the survey records. The parcel outline, the western boundary, a shaded corridor running its full length with a date written beside it. She studied it. She said, "That's the strip along the fence line." He said, "Yep." She said, "Is it yours?" He said, "The land under it is." She looked at the map another moment. Then she went back to the stove. That was the whole conversation. Over the next several months, Marvin drove past the parcel once a week. He did not stop. He drove slowly and looked. In August of 1988, he noticed something new. Survey flags. Orange plastic wire stakes placed along the eastern edge of a parcel adjacent to his. He wrote the date in the notebook. 2 weeks later, he went to the recorder's office. A new LLC had filed a deed on the adjacent parcel. Caulfield Development Limited Liability Company, registered in Ohio. Gerald Caulfield, registered agent. Marvin wrote it down. He went back the next month. A second parcel had transferred. Same grantee. By spring of 1989, before the auction, before the folding tables and the thermos and the laugh, Caulfield had assembled 280 acres in 4 separate deeds, all of it east of the Decker parcel. All of it accessed from State Route 40 by a single county road that could carry light traffic but not the weight of industrial trucks. Marvin pulled his road atlas and traced the logical route for a service road, heavy equipment, distribution, the kind of traffic a warehouse or logistics facility would generate. There was only one route that made sense. A straight line west from the assembled parcels, through the Decker ground, along the western boundary, along the 40-foot corridor that had been recorded as a public easement in 1974 and never vacated. Caulfield was assembling land for something big, and the only practical route to that something ran straight through ground nobody had bid on because everyone assumed it was worthless. In the fall of 1988, 6 months before the auction, Marvin drove out to the parcel at dusk. He parked at the fence line, sat in the truck for a while. The scrub trees along the western edge were going gold and rust. The light was low. Everything was still. He opened the notebook to a fresh page. He wrote one line, "The only way in is the one they forgot to close." He closed the notebook, looked at the land one more time, then he drove home. Gerald Caulfield didn't know it yet. Nobody did. But the trap was already built. All Marvin had to do was buy the land. Somebody knocked on the door on a Thursday morning in October of 1997. Marvin set his coffee cup on the counter before he answered. The man on the porch was young, mid-20s, good shoes, a clipboard in one hand and a business card already extended in the other. He said his name was Kyle, and he represented a land acquisition group working in Licking County. He said the group was assembling parcels for a light industrial corridor. He offered $61,000 for the 19.4 acres. Marvin listened to the whole pitch. Kyle said the timeline was flexible, said the firm could close in 60 days or 30, said the number could go to $70,000 if Marvin wanted to think about it over the weekend. Marvin said, "No thank you." Kyle said, "You want to at least look at the contract?" Marvin said, "No thank you." Kyle left a card. Marvin noted the name of the acquisition group in his notebook, looked it up at the recorder's office the following week. The registered agent was a Columbus LLC. The LLC listed one principal, Gerald Caulfield. 8 years had passed since the auction. Marvin had mowed the strip along the western boundary twice a year, every year. He used a push mower for the first 6 years, then a small riding mower Doris had pushed him to buy. He kept the survey markers clear. He paid the annual tax bill every April, $214 a year on 19.4 acres assessed at agricultural value, $214. He paid it the way a man pays a utility bill, without drama. The land did nothing. It produced nothing. It sat flat and quiet on the county plat map while the world moved around it, and Marvin watched. He noted the survey flags when they appeared and disappeared along the adjacent parcels. He noted when new gravel was laid on the county road to the east. He noted in the fall of 2003 the first time a set of tire tracks appeared in the western corridor, wide set, heavy load, pointing north to south. He photographed them. He wrote the date in the notebook. A county official named Perkins called in the spring of 2004. He was formal, pleasant. He said Licking County was assessing transportation corridors for a proposed industrial access route and that the county was interested in acquiring a formal easement along the western boundary of Marvin's parcel. He offered $18,500. Marvin said that corridor is already on the books as public. Perkins said the 1974 filing, yes. Our legal team considers it effectively abandoned under ORC 5553. Marvin said, has the county filed a vacation of record? A pause. Perkins said, not at this time. Marvin said, then it's still on the books. Perkins said he understood and that the county would be in touch. The county was not in touch again. Doris had listened to the phone call from the kitchen doorway. After Marvin hung up, she said, they're nervous. He said, getting there. She refilled his coffee and went back to what she was doing. That evening, their daughter Claire, 14 years old and doing homework at the far end of the kitchen table, looked up from her textbook and asked about the strip along the fence. She said, why do you keep mowing it if nobody uses it? Marvin said, because it's mine to mow. She said, is it worth anything? He said, depends on who needs it. She looked at him a moment, then went back to her homework. He did not explain further. She would remember the answer for 20 years. In the spring of 2011, a man named Keene arrived at the front door. Three-piece suit, leather briefcase. He was not from an acquisition group. He was not a county official. He was an attorney representing Caulfield Logistics, which was what Gerald Caulfield's old development company had become after Gerald died in 2003 and his son Derek took over and turned it into a regional freight operation. Keene accepted a cup of coffee at the kitchen table. He opened his briefcase, set a folder on the table, and offered $310,000 for the 19.4 acres. Marvin listened. Keene said the company had a warehouse project pending, said the project had financing in place, said the access route was the last piece, said $310,000 was a strong number for agricultural ground in Licking County. Marvin said, I'm not selling. Keene said, Mr. Holt, I want to be direct with you. Our legal position is that the 1974 easement has been functionally abandoned. Marvin said, has your client filed a vacation of record? Keene said, we're prepared to move in that direction. Marvin said, when you do, I'll have a lawyer present. Until then, there's nothing to discuss. Keene set a second sheet on the table, $400,000. Marvin looked at it. He said, I appreciate the trip out. Keene closed his briefcase. He stood at the door a moment before he left and said, Mr. Holt, is there any number that works for you? Marvin said, it's not about a number. Keene drove back to Columbus. 3 weeks later, Derek Caulfield himself called. Marvin let it ring 4 times. Derek said he wanted to speak man to man. Said the company had $40 million in warehouse infrastructure waiting on a signed deed. Said the corridor was 12 feet of scrub trees and old survey flags. He offered $500,000. Marvin said, I hear you. Derek said, that's a life-changing amount of money. Marvin said, I suppose it is for some people. A long pause. Derek said, what do you want then? Marvin said, I'll let you know when I'm ready. He hung up. Somewhere in a Columbus office tower that afternoon, a lawyer named Stearns was on the phone with Derek Caulfield, pacing in front of a whiteboard with 3 words written on it. Abandonment, adverse possession, eminent domain. Stearns said, we have options. Derek said, then use them. Stearns started making calls. Doris found Marvin at the kitchen table that evening. Notebook open. 17 years of entries behind him. Offers, dates, tax receipts, truck photographs, LLC registrations, a photocopy of the 1974 recording with Bev's 35-cent stamp in the corner. Doris said, how long until they come back? He said, not long. She said, and then? He said, then Claire comes home. On a Tuesday morning in January of 2023, the phone rang at 7:04. Marvin was at the kitchen table, coffee in hand. He looked at the screen, unknown number, Columbus area code. He recognized the prefix. It was Stearns. Marvin set his coffee cup down. He picked up the phone. Stearns said, my client is prepared to resolve this today. Marvin said, good morning. Stearns said the number was $900,000, a wire transfer. Clean. No liens, no conditions, no future claims. Marvin said, I'm not selling. A pause. Stearns said, Holt, Meridian National filed a declaratory judgment action this morning. They're going to court to vacate the 1974 easement and establish clear title to the corridor under abandonment doctrine. Marvin said, I know. He hung up. Then he called Claire. She drove down on a Saturday. Arrived at 10:15 in the morning with a banker's box, a certified copy of the original deed, and 12 years of property law behind her. She spread everything across the kitchen table. The original 1974 easement recording, the photocopy Bev had stamped. 35 years of annual tax receipts paid in April without exception. The 1986 quiet title filing from Caulfield Development, dismissed in 1987. The notebook with the truck photographs dating back to 2003. She read in silence for 20 minutes. She said, Dad. He said, yep. She said, they kept taxing the parcel. He said, every year. She looked up. She said, if the county taxed this land for 50 years, they can't argue the state considered it abandoned. He said, no, they cannot. She closed the folder. She said, I'll call Stearns. The hearing was scheduled for April 9th in Licking County Common Pleas Court, Room 4. Stearns brought 3 attorneys, a paralegal, and a land title expert from Columbus. He argued that the 1974 recording was a dead instrument, non-functional, that no road had ever been built, that no public use had ever occurred, that under Ohio Revised Code 5553051, time and non-use constituted effective abandonment. He was partly right about the law. He was entirely wrong about the facts. Claire stood up. She said abandonment under ORC 55531 requires a formal resolution by the county commissioners. There is no such resolution on file. I have the complete meeting minutes from 1975 to 2024. She set them on the table. Then she set down the 1986 quiet title filing. Caulfield Development's attempt to erase the easement, dismissed for improper notice, never adjudicated on the merits. She said, the plaintiff's predecessor knew this easement existed and tried to kill it in 1986. They failed. The easement was never legally challenged after that. It has been valid and recorded for 50 years. Stearns started to speak. She set the 3rd document on the table. Every tax bill the county had sent to Marvin Holt for the Decker parcel since 1989, paid, dated, stamped. She said, the county taxed this parcel every single year. You cannot collect taxes on abandoned property. The county's own records defeat the abandonment claim. The room was quiet. The judge ruled from the bench. Meridian National's declaratory judgment action was denied in full. Stearns reached for his phone before the gavel came down. Claire called Marvin from the courthouse steps. She said, we won. He said, how's the drive back? She said, Dad. He said, good work, Claire. The negotiation took 6 days. Marvin did not take the lump sum. He had never intended to take the lump sum. A one-time payment dies. A monthly payment does not. He set terms. A permanent recorded easement lease granting Caulfield Logistics and Meridian National access to the 40-foot western corridor for commercial vehicle use. Monthly payment of $9,400, indexed to the Consumer Price Index annually, transferable to his heirs upon his death. Stearns pushed back on the CPI clause. Claire said, without it, we record the corridor as restricted and your client reroutes through Parse 12. 18 months of construction delays, $1.4 million in infrastructure costs. Stearns signed on page 7. Claire called at 4:30 in the afternoon. She said, it's done, $9,400 a month. Permanent, indexed. He said, thank you. She said, are you going to say anything else? He said, drive safe. He hung up. Doris was at the stove. She did not ask what the call was about. She turned on the kettle. That was all. The signing happened at the county clerk's office on a Wednesday morning. Marvin drove himself, wore the same canvas work jacket he had worn to the 1989 auction, the one with the breast pocket. He signed 3 pages. He shook nobody's hand. He walked out to his truck, sat in the driver's seat, and opened the notebook to the last blank page. He wrote one line, $9,400 a month. They'll pay it until the land says otherwise. He closed the notebook. 3 days later, the agreement ran in the Licking County Advocate, a 2-paragraph item. Easement lease. Decker Road parcel. Terms undisclosed. Derek Caulfield read it in his Columbus office and did not comment. At the Grange Hall on Route 40, the same parking lot where the 1989 auction had been held, 3 men who had stood along the fence that day were talking over coffee. One of them said, "Holt, the landlocked parcel." Nobody laughed this time. Some men spend their careers chasing the deal that makes them. Marvin Holt spent 35 years already holding it. If Meridian National had called before sending that tow truck, would you have taken the $900,000 and walked away or held out for the monthly deal like Marvin? Drop it in the comments. And if this story hit different, you already know what to do.